Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here.
Most are afraid of unknown depths, skirting shores thinking world flat, and with the island girls in celebration of new religion. Nobody led me or said this way. I sailed alone on makeshift raft with wind as companion. Fate for deliverance, confidence enough to assess new disposition. Seekers of lost paradise may seem fools to those who never sought the other worlds. Welcome to Momentary Zen with Zen Garcia. Visit www.fallenangels.tv. You're listening to Revolution Radio.
As little as long ago, or as far away as forever. This is where we meet to celebrate what never was as it comes to pass. Welcome, friends. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is Momentary Zen here on Revolution Radio. And I had a few issues with the computer. I don't know exactly what's going on, but that's why I'm not in the chat room yet. And so those of you that are in there, let me know that the sound is good and that everything is coming through clear. I had to restart and set up a different mic all within 2 minutes. And so I just want to be sure that the sound quality is good and that y'all are capable of hearing me, and so that if the settings aren't correct, hopefully one of the other hosts can cover for me if that's necessary. But hopefully everything will be all right, and you'll be able to hear me, and I'll be able to do this show, because I've got an interesting show lined up for everybody this evening. A lot of you have asked me about um, just the different lost, forbidden, and forgotten books that have been largely left out of the collection of. Hello, everyone. It's okay, good, wonderful. Thank you, Kathy. Um, and so I just wanted to cover and talk about in this show the many different books which are and have been left out of the canonized Bible. And those of you, and there are many that are only King James Version Bible students and scholars of only the canon, and for whatever reason will not read into or investigate any of the many other texts that are out there. And that's fine. I don't I'm certainly not gonna in any way bash you. I totally honor you for where you are, and I know that a lot of people like to focalize their efforts on just the 66 authorized books of the authorized canon. And I know that it's a great deal of material. Hello, Link and Mini Donut, Zipster, Kathy, Blues Girl, Zippy, and Mr. Rowe, and all those that are not in the immediate scroll. Know that I appreciate all of you, and thank you for taking the time to join me. It's going to be a really, really good show, because one of the books that I also, or one of the videos on my YouTube channel under Endeavor Freedom that gets just a number of visits and many people, a lot of hits, even daily, um, is a video called the Forbidden Books of the Bible, which in that show I did it several years back, but I didn't even cover in fullness what I'm going to be talking about this evening. And there are so many texts that that have been excluded, and so I'm, I'm not going to, because there's a lot of material to cover, and so I'm just going to talk about initially even the books that are mentioned in the canon that have been excluded. And then we'll go into some other collections. And I'm also going to provide a few links to the books, some of the books that are my favorite collections, because I'm one of those that likes the really extremely large volumes of collected works, as far as like the Pseudipigrapha or the Apocryphal texts, um, or even like the Gnostic Bible, and just different huge collections of books. I like those really thick 400, 500 page compilations of extra biblical, extra canonical material. And I love studying all the different books that I can find, those that are not found within the canons. Like even there's a text in a book called the Forgotten Books of Eden, the Forbidden Books of the Bible. There's another book called the Lost Books of the Bible, which has a number of books, like the first book of Adam and Eve, and the first book of Enoch, and the second book of Adam and Eve, and the apocryphal texts that have been excluded from the canon that were never included. And then there are things such as the Dead Sea Scrolls collection, and even the the Nag Hammadi Codices, which are collections that were most recently discovered, that are huge, massive collections. I mean, as large as the canon in and of itself. Um, and like when we go into even the books that were excluded, or the books that are mentioned within the canon but that are no longer found, that are no longer even available to the public, some which are, like the book of Jasher, the book of Jubilees, and then you have, even in the canon in the book of Jude, there's reference and allusion to like the book of Enoch. But for the most part, there are many, many other texts that are not any longer available and cannot be, um, are no longer available to the public for any kind of scrutiny or study. And I believe there's somewhere like between 22 and 28 of those texts. And we'll start with those and I'll name those. And we'll talk about the scriptures which mention those. But even if you consider 28 books, that's like more than a third of the official canon. You consider 66 books, and though many people don't know that the King James version, uh, the when it first came out, it was 80 books. It included the 13 books of the Apocrypha and another text called the Shepherd of Hermas, which, depending on um, where you go and what you study, it's either included with the Apocrypha, the 13 books of the Apocrypha, and then you have the Shepherd of Hermas, which would make it an 80-book canon, or you have it included as part of the pseudepigraphal texts. And so let's go ahead and start with those, and then because there's a lot of work to cover, and I'm not sure how much I'll be able to. I'd like to get all of it done in this one show, but I don't know if that will be possible. All right. In Numbers 21, chapter 21, verse 14, there's mention of the book of the wars of Yahweh, of the Lord. It is another way that it's referenced, the book of the wars of the Lord. In Joshua 10, verses 12 through 13, and also 2 Samuel chapter 1, verse 19 through 27, there's a mention of the book of Jasher. And after I make mention of these, I'll actually read some of the verses. But I want to just give you this, really quick, because there's more mentioned here than when I actually read the actual verses. Okay, and then in First Kings chapter 14, verse 29, you have the mention of the chronicles of the kings of Judah. And there's actually a couple of mentions, just like you have Chronicles 1 and Chronicles 2, and 1st and 2nd Samuel, the same thing. And in First Kings chapter 14, verse 19, mention of the chronicles of the kings of Israel. In First Kings chapter 11, verse 41, mention of the acts of Solomon. First Chronicles chapter 9, verse 1, and also in Second Chronicles chapter 20, verse 34, mention of the book of the kings of Israel. Let me check the chat room real quick. Okay. I'll be checking the chat room periodically. I just want to make sure that there's no problem with the volume. So if there's anything like that that comes up during the course of what I'm reading and doing, then definitely let me know. I appreciate it. All right. Ongoing. In Second Chronicles chapter 16, verse 11, mention of the book of the kings of Judah and Israel. In Second Chronicles chapter 27, verse 7, the book of the kings of Israel and Judah, which it seems, similar to me, but they must be completely different texts. Perhaps. I don't know. None of us have seen them, and we don't know when they actually disappeared. Second Chronicles chapter 33, verse 18, the acts of the kings of Israel. First Chronicles chapter 29, verse 29, the acts of Samuel the seer. In First Chronicles 29, verse 29, also mentions the acts of Gad, Gad, the seer. In First Chronicles chapter 29, verse 29, also mentions the acts of Nathan the prophet. In Second Chronicles chapter 9, verse 29, you have mention of three different texts: the history of Nathan the prophet, the prophecy of Ahijah, Ahiah, the Shilonite, Shilonite, and also the visions of Iddo the seer, Iddo the seer. In Second Chronicles chapter 12, verse 15, the acts of Shemaiah the prophet and Iddo the seer, which, we'd never even heard. Maybe they're, mentioned their lives and their acts or how they were involved with Israel are mentioned within the text of Chronicles, but these are not well recognized individuals, and their lives are certainly not well known about. Second Chronicles chapter 20, verse 34, the acts of Jehu, the son of Hanani, Hanani. In Second Chronicles chapter 33, verse 19, the acts of the seers. And so, there would be many of them. So perhaps a compilation of like the minor prophets. Second Chronicles chapter 13, verse 22, the midrash of the prophet Iddo. Second Chronicles chapter 24, verse 27, the midrash on the book of the Kings, or the book of Kings. Second Chronicles chapter 26, verse 22, the book by the prophet Isaiah. In Second Chronicles 32, chapter 32, the vision of Isaiah the prophet. And I wonder if that has anything to do with the ascension of Isaiah, which is also the is a book about Isaiah's vision. Could be the same thing. I'm not positive though. Nehemiah chapter 12, verse 23 mentions the book of the Chronicles. In Exodus chapter 24, verse 7, the book of the covenant. In Esther chapter 10, verse 2, the chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia. First Samuel chapter 10, verse 25, the book of Samuel. In Second Chronicles chapter 35, verse 25, laments for Josiah, which, Josiah was the king that restored Israel back into covenant with the Most High, with Yahweh Elohim, when Israel had fallen away and had taken up Baal worship, um, worshiping in groves and in high places to idol gods. First Chronicles chapter 27, verse 24, the Chronicles of King David. In Colossians chapter 4, verse 16, Paul's letter to the Laodiceans. In First Corinthians uh, chapter 5, verse 9, Paul's previous Corinthian letter. And so, I mean, just look at how many books are even mentioned in the scriptures which are lost, that have been disappeared. And why people, would limit themselves even greater, already being limited by the amount of material that has been um, eradicated and destroyed, like whole libraries, like even the Library of Alexandria, which was huge and had many, um, many texts which are no longer available to us, scrolls, all of that was destroyed. And these kind of things are done to keep people dumbed down and to keep people in ignorance. And why people would support that by not even reading or studying those things which are available to us, especially with our being the fig tree generation, our being, being blessed with access to the internet where we can just type in, a keyword and have the internet searched out in millions of pieces of, you know, of response and searches returned, and why people won't utilize such access. It's just mind blowing to me, because you have to consider, like, there was a time when the priestly class did not even allow the lay people, the masses, didn't teach them to read, and tried to keep it only the right to read and to be able to understand the gospel to a very minor few, and to hoard such understanding, and to keep people dumbed down in ignorance so that they would have to come to them for um, for interpretation, and they would have to look to them as intercessories for understanding the word of God. And now, even though, everybody, most of the world, much of the world has been taught to read and has the ability to study, and now with the advent of the internet, has does not even have to, like previous, you had to have a huge collection of books to even be able to study, and even then you were limited to the books that you have. But here now, with the internet, we have access to all things in all worlds, and yet still people deny themselves. It's just mind blowing to me. I personally try to get my hands on everything I can find, and to make copies of it, um, and to provide that to you. That's why in my radio work, I have attempted to share and read from many different books that most people have never even heard about, all just to encourage you in your search for truth and understanding. And yet, I'm criticized often for even investigating or reading these extra biblical and extra canonical texts, and from teaching people from them. And, you know, how people that choose to limit themselves in that way can criticize me for making and making people aware of all that's out there is, it's absolutely mind blowing to me. All right, continuing, because I know we will quickly run out of time. And I'm not even sure I'm going to read all of these passages, but we'll see. The mention of the book of the wars of the Lord. Therefore, it is said in the book of the wars of the Lord, Waheb in Sapha, and the valleys of Arnon, and the slope of the valleys that extend to the seat of Ar, and leans to the borders of Moab. Numbers 21, verse 14 through 15. And the sun stood still and the moon stopped until the nation took vengeance on their enemies. Is this not written in the book of Jasher? Joshua 10, verse 13. What I'll probably do is just read some of these, because, like I said, I've got a lot of material to cover tonight. The manner of the kingdom. Then Samuel told the people in the rights and duties of the kingship, and he wrote them in a book and laid it up before the Lord. Then Samuel sent all the people away, each one to his home. So, a book called The Manner of the Kingdom. which of course we don't have. Now, the rest of the acts of Solomon and all that he did and his wisdom, are they not written in the book of the acts of Solomon? Uh, a couple on the chronicle of the kings of Israel and Judah. And the rest of the acts of Jeroboam, how he warred and how he reigned, behold, they are written in the book of the chronicles of the kings of Israel. Now, the rest of the acts of Rehoboam and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the chronicles of the kings of Judah? Now, I already made mention of all the verses, so I'm just going to read. Annals of King David. Joab the son of Zeruiah began to count, but did not finish. Yet wrath came upon Israel for this, and the number was not entered in the chronicle of King David. Now the acts of King David from first to last are written in the chronicles of Samuel the seer, and in the chronicles of Nathan the prophet, and in the chronicles of Gad the seer. Now the rest of the acts of Solomon from first to last, are they not written in the history of Nathan the prophet, and in the prophecy of Ahijah the Shilonite, and in the visions of Iddo the seer concerning Jeroboam the son of Nebat? Um, yeah, so many books. Now, the rest of the acts of Solomon from first to last, are they not written in the history of Nathan the prophet? And we'll be right back. All right, welcome back, everybody. And Olive, no, I will not forget the Nag Hammadi collections. I'll be going into those very soon. Really, there are thousands of texts which are now available to us. Um, the two that have recently come to light that were discovered in around 1945 and also 1946 or 47, um, the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Nag Hammadi Codices, which I'll be naming those texts when I get to that portion of the show, but thousands of books. And why people, again, and I'm not trying to harp upon this in any way. I just don't understand. Like, truth to me is like a huge puzzle that we're trying to piece together, and like a crime that you're trying to solve. And really, the crime is that truth has been hidden from us and also been stolen and desecrated and disappeared and eradicated and destroyed. And as seekers of truth, we're trying to piece together what truth is and what it was and what it had been. And in order to make that determination, we have to, in my opinion, get as many pieces as we can, study as many aspects of it as we can, and then hopefully, in dedicating ourselves to the pursuit of its discovery, then hopefully, in doing and putting forth great effort, then the revelation of it will come forth, and we will then be able to elucidate with clarity what exactly truth is. And just like an investigator that is trying to determine the what happened at a certain crime scene investigation, they will look at every aspect of the scene, things that are considered irrelevant, things that may not at that particular time make sense to them, things that they may not initially be able to uh, implicate as being part of the crime, things that seem to be um, just maybe nonsensical or even considered idiotic and not pertaining to. Nothing is discounted as irrelevant. Everything is considered and everything is looked at with keen eye. And that's what makes really good investigators and criminal detectives. That's the kind of dedication, the kind of um, uh, research skills that individuals must apply in order to be good at their jobs. And so, would you not, in trying to be a seeker of truth and a seeker of lost paradise, and one that is trying to understand the gospel or the word of God, and be able to make sense of how it ties together with history and mythology and everything else, how all of that, the underlying truth of all things comes together. I would think that, that that's the way we would approach things, and that certainly you can't pass judgment on something without even having read it, or to judge others because they choose to study it and you choose to ignore it. I mean, uh, they're bad Christians for reading extra biblical and extra canonical text. That seems absolutely ludicrous to me. And yet, that is the posture, the attitude, and the judgment that I receive from so many. I can't even tell you the kind of people that criticize me on, whether it's on my YouTube videos or, you know, um, in reviewing my books, or whatever, because I read the extra biblical, extra canonical text, that somehow discredits my work in their minds. That just seems ignorant to me, but whatever. All right. Just a few more passages here, and then we'll go into some of these other collections. The rest of the acts of Abijah, his ways and his sayings, are written in the story of the prophet Iddo. Now, the acts of Rehoboam, from first to last, are they not written in the records of Shemaiah the prophet and Iddo the seer, according to the genealogical enrollment? Now, the rest of the acts of Jehoshaphat, from first to last, are written in the chronicles of Jehu, the son of Hananiah, which are recorded in the book of the kings of Israel. Accounts of his sons and of the many oracles against him, and of the rebuilding of the house of God, are written in the story of the book of the kings. And Amaziah, his son, reigned in his place. Now, the rest of the acts of Uzziah, from first to last, Isaiah the prophet, the son of Amos, wrote. Now, the rest of the acts of Manasseh, and his prayer to his God, and the words of the seers who spoke to him in the name of the Lord, the God of Israel, behold, they are in the chronicles of the kings of Israel. Last two. And his prayer, and how God was moved by his entreaty, and all his sin and his faithlessness, and the sites on which he built high places and set up the Asherim and the images before he humbled himself. Behold, they are written in the chronicles of the seers. Jeremiah also uttered a lament for Josiah, and all the singing men and singing women have spoken of Josiah in their laments to this day. They made these a rule in Israel. Behold, they are written in the laments. All right. And so I read all of that. Now I'm going to make mention of a few gospels that are not included um, in the canon. The Gospel of Thomas, which is known and held to be one of the earliest of the uh, Gospels, considered to be Gnostic for whatever reason. The Gospel of the Lord, the Gospel of Truth, and the Gospel of the Egyptians. And then recently, you've had the Gospel of Judas come to light, the Gospel of Mary, the Gospel of Philip, and these are just some of the Gospels which are not included in the canon, but are also available to individuals that would like to study. Um, I made mention of the books of the Apocrypha, which are excluded from the canon, but that at one time had been apportioned with the official canon. The King James used to be 80 books, and it included these books of the Apocrypha, which I will make mention, which Apocrypha just means secret books. The books of the Apocrypha are the first and second Esdras, which second Esdras is one of my most favorite apocryphal books. And it dates back to 150 to 100 BC. Tobit, which dates back to 200 BC. Judith to 150 BC. Additions to Esther, 140, 130 BC. The Wisdom of Solomon, 30 BC. Ecclesiasticus, which is also referenced as the wisdom of Jesus, son of Sirach, which dates back to 132 BC. Baruch to 150 to 50 BC. The letter of Jeremiah, 300 to 100 BC. Song of the Three Holy Children, dating back, or Daniel 3, 170 to 160 BC. Susanna, dating back to 200 to 0 BC. Bel and the Dragon, dating back to 100 BC. Additions to Daniel, or the Prayer of Azariah, 200 to 0 BC. The Prayer of Manasseh, 100 to 0 BC. First Maccabees, 110 BC. And Second Maccabees, 110 to 170 BC. The books of these pseudipigraphal works, which are books that are attributed to different authors. And two of my most favorite book collections are written by James H. Charlesworth. And you can find these collections. They're the Old Testament Pseudipigrapha, a 2-volume set, and you can find these. I'll post it in the chat room. But you can find these in on Amazon, and they're about 400 pages each, 400 to 500 pages each. I did post a link in there. Hello, Herbal and Up and Neff. It's good to see you, Blues Girl. And Hemp. and Paul. All right, let's continue. And so the pseudepigraphal works are also some of my most favorites. Like I said, I really love to read all of the books that are available that I can get my hands on. And I have some um, which are not even part of all of these collections that going to be mentioning. There are other books out there, and there are those that are just coming to light. Like, um, those of you that follow my work know that I'm involved in currently in the translation of the Thracian Chronicles, which currently are only found in Bulgarian in written in the ancient Thracian language, and they're not anywhere found in English and not available to the English speaking world. But that I have been blessed to work with some hardcore linguists in interpreting, and they are making those available to me in English, and then I am fine tuning that English translation so that we can make them available um, to those of you that are interested, which there are many of you that, like myself, are very curious as to the different books that are out there, which are, have not normally been available to the public. And it's my opinion that, one of the reasons why we have this material coming to light now and being available to us is because we are the last generation. And then, as it said in Joel, and also in the book of Enoch, from them I heard all things and understood what I saw, that which will not take place in this generation, but in a generation which is to succeed at a distant period on account of the elect. That's what Enoch said in the first book of Enoch. And then in Joel, he said, and it shall come to pass afterward that I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, your old men shall dream dreams, and your young men shall see visions. And also upon the servants and upon the handmaids, in those days will I pour out my spirit. And so it's my opinion that we are living in those days, and that this is one of the reasons why the Most High is bringing all of this information to light. All right, let's continue. A list of the texts which you can find in the pseudepigraphal works are the Epistle of Barnabas, the first and second Epistle of Clement to the Corinthians, the letter of the Smyrnians, known as the Martyrdom of Polycarp, the Book of Enoch, the Gospel of Judas, the Gospel of Thomas, the Psalms of Solomon, the Odes of Solomon, the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs, Second Baruch, the books of Adam and Eve, the first and second books of Adam and Eve, the Acts of Philip, the Apocalypse of Peter, the Gospel of the Nativity of Mary, the Gospel of Nicodemus, the history of Joseph the carpenter, the Acts of Paul, including Paul and Thecla, the 7 epistles of Ignatius, the epistle of Polycarp to the Philippians. And there are so much more. I mean, just even off of the top of my head, the vision of Paul, the apocalypse of Peter. Um, let's see, the apocalypse of Zephaniah, um, the apocalypse of Daniel, I mean, there are so many texts, and they're not even, you know, listed in these official collections. And I've actually got two huge collections that I've compiled called the Sacred Writings, and I will actually perhaps at some point make those available and try to publish them, because there's just so many texts out there which nobody has available to them, and which are not, even with the internet, many of these are difficult to find, or have since disappeared, like even the Targums, which is a whole another set of books that are huge collections of translations. This is the Aramaic translations of the original Hebrew Torah, which are no longer, which a lot of it has been mostly lost, and you cannot find electronic copies of these. They are, however, available. Um, Thank God for the Logos software project, of which Michael Heiser is a part of. They have published many of these targums and released them in hardback. And I've been collecting these. They're very expensive, but for those like myself that are interested in these texts, they're priceless. They are absolutely priceless. All right, when we return from break, we'll go into the Dead Sea Scrolls and also to the Nag Hammadi collections, and then some other, I've got other things I want to also talk about, but those are the two that we'll focus on. And oh, and also I'm going to make available a link to an electronic copy of the Gnostic Bible, which is an incredible amount of work in and of itself, which not a lot of people have heard about or read about. And I go ahead and paste in the chat room a link to that text, so that those of you that are interested, it's not letting me into the chat room. Hold on. Okay. So that those of you that are interested, you can download it for yourself and then read it. It's got really an incredible amount of information in it. And it also is one of my favorite collections as well. All right, I've got to enter the chat room again. Hold on. For whatever reason, it kicked me out. This is strange. I don't know. It's not letting me in there, so I'm gonna just send this to Kathy, and then hopefully she'll be able to send it to you. All right, we'll be right back, everyone. All right, welcome back, everybody. I'm just gonna really quickly just state that Revelation Radio is the largest listener supported commercial free and corporate free radio network on the internet and on anywhere in the world, and that those of you that can and do appreciate what we do, please do go to freedomslips.com and click on the donate button. I'm not going to go into an extensive, as far as talking about it on this particular show, just because I've got so much material to bring forth. But know that we appreciate you and thank you in advance for those of you for not only your fellowship and your dialogue and your support in the way that you do as far as listening to the various hosts that come here, but also in supporting us financially and allowing us the ability to utilize this as platform for doing what we do. All right, Dead Sea Scrolls, because I've got a lot of material I need to cover this evening. Estimated to have been created around 408 to 318 CE. It was discovered in 1946 and 1947, and also in 1956. The Dead Sea, I'm just going to read a little bit from Wikipedia and then I'll get into the details of the texts that are part of the collection. The Dead Sea Scrolls, in the narrow sense of Qumran cave scrolls, are a collection of some 981 different texts discovered between 1946 and 1956 in 11 caves in the immediate vicinity of the ancient settlement of Khirbet Qumran in the West Bank. The caves are located about 2 kilometers inland from the northwest shore of the Dead Sea, from which they derived their name. See, 981 different texts. And of course, there were many that were, multiples, like I believe the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees, that there were multiple fragments and copies of that particular text found in this particular area. But and then there were partial fragments of many other texts also. And there's a lot of material that is exclusive, completely particular to the Dead Sea Scrolls collection, and also the Nag Hammadi Codices. You don't find those books anywhere else available to us. And if it weren't for the discovery of these two collections, we would not have many of these texts available, even in singular copy, which I find it amazing. And I also believe that, this is the Most High revealing to us um, much information and much material, which is part of, and I don't think he would have even allowed it to be discovered or even allowed it to be protected had he not wanted us to have it. And people, and if that were not true, then, and if it was to be blasphemous or to contradict the scripture, why would he allow them to be discovered? It just doesn't make sense. And yet so many will label them Gnostic texts, and like that's some kind of negative, or a bad word, negative connotation, and so people should avoid them like the plague. It's just ludicrous. All right. The consensus is that the Qumran cave scrolls date from the last 3 centuries BCE and the 1st century CE. Bronze coins found at the same sites from series begin with John Hyrcanus and containing until the First Jewish-Roman War. I'm not going to go into the radiocarbon dating. I don't think all that actually works anyway. Sure. Just a little bit more. The texts are of great historical, religious, and linguistic significance because they include their third oldest known surviving manuscripts of works later included in the Hebrew Bible canon, along with deuterocanonical and extra biblical manuscripts, which preserve evidence of the diversity of religious thought in late Second Temple Judaism. Biblical texts older than the Dead Sea Scrolls has been discovered only in 2 silver scroll-shaped amulets containing portions of the priestly blessing from the Book of Numbers, excavated in Jerusalem in Ketef Hinnom and dated to 600 BCE. A burnt piece of Leviticus dating from the 6th century CE, analyzed in 2015, was found to be the 4th oldest piece of the Torah known to exist. Most of the texts are written in Hebrew, with some in Aramaic and different regional dialects. including Nabatean and a few in Greek. If discoveries from the Judean desert are included, Latin from Masada and Arabic from Khirbet al-Madur can be added. Most texts are written on parchment, some on papyrus, and one on copper. The scrolls have been traditionally been identified with the ancient Jewish sect called the Essenes, although some recent interpretations have challenged this associated and argue that the scrolls were penned by priests in Jerusalem, the Zadokites, or other unknown Jewish groups. Just a little bit more. Due to the poor condition of some of the scrolls, not all of them have been identified. Those that have been identified can be divided into three general groups. Some 40% of them are copies of texts from the Hebrew scriptures. Approximately another 30% of them are texts from the Second Temple period, which ultimately were not canonized in the Hebrew Bible, like the book of Enoch, Jubilees, and the book of Tobit, the wisdom of Sirach, Psalms 152 through 155, etc. And the remaining roughly 30% of them are sectarian manuscripts of previously unknown documents that shed light on the rules and beliefs of the particular group, sect, or groups within greater Judaism, like the community rule, the war scroll, the Pesher on Habakkuk, and the rule of the blessing. There are 225 biblical texts included in the Dead Sea Scroll documents, or around 22% of the total. And with deuterocanonical books, the number increased to 235. The Dead Sea Scrolls contain part of all but one of the books of the Tanakh, of the Hebrew Bible, and the Old Testament Proto-Canon. They also include four of the deuterocanonical books included in Catholic and Eastern Orthodox Bibles. Tobit Ben Sirach Baruch number 6, also known as the letter of the Epistle of Jeremiah, and Psalms 151. The book of Esther has not yet been found, and scholars believe Esther is missing because, as a Jew, her marriage to a Persian king may have been looked down upon by the inhabitants of Qumran, or because the book has the Purim festival, which is not included in the Qumran calendar. Listed below are the most representative books, along with the Deuterocanonicals, of the Bible found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, including the number of translatable Dead Sea texts that represent a copy of Scripture from each biblical book. All right, now we're going to go into the specifics of the Dead Sea Scrolls books. 39 copies of Psalms were found. 33 copies of Deuteronomy, 25 copies of First Enoch. I mean, look at how many copies. You can tell that they prized First Enoch, and yet it wasn't even included in our official canon, even though it's mentioned by Jude. Um, and without Enoch, in my opinion, you just can't even understand, as far as the detail of the fallen watchers, nor the book on the courses of the heavenly luminaries describing the earth as a circular flat plane, and also the motions of the sun and the moon above it in course and circuit. Genesis 24 copies, Isaiah 22 copies, Jubilees 21 copies, Exodus 18 copies, Leviticus 17 copies, Numbers 11 copies, the minor prophets 10 copies, Daniel 8 copies, Jeremiah 6, Ezekiel 6, Job 6, Tobit 5, 1st and 2nd Kings 4, 1st and 2nd Samuel 4, Judges 4, the Song of Songs 4, Ruth 4, Lamentations 4, Sirach 3, Ecclesiastes 2, Joshua 2. And now the non-biblical. The majority of the texts found among the Dead Sea Scrolls are non-biblical in nature and were thought to be insignificant for understanding the composition of canonized of the biblical books, but a different consensus has emerged, which sees many of these works as being collected by the Essene community instead of being composed by them. Scholars now recognize some of these works were composed earlier than the Essene period, when some of the biblical books were still being written or redacted into their final forms. All right. Now I'm going to make mention of some of the Dead Sea Scroll texts themselves, which, again, there's a lot of information that is not found anywhere else. The Divine Throne Chariot. I guess what I could do too is give you the link for where I got this information that I'm going to be now reading from. I'm going to give it to Kathy and she'll share it with you. And that it also has links for the texts themselves. So for those that would like to read them, you will be able to do so. All right. The Divine Throne Chariot, the Book of Secrets, the Thanksgiving Psalms, the Parable of the Bountiful Tree, a baptismal liturgy, the Coming of Melchizedek, Tongues of Fire, the Book of Giants, which I wish we had that without, any breaks or being broken in any way. That book is amazing. Psalms, phylactery, the community rule, calendrical document, calendrical document. Some Torah precepts, Enoch, Hosea commentary, prayer for King Jonathan, Leviticus, the songs of the Sabbath sacrifice, the Damascus document, the war rule, the great Isaiah scroll, the temple scroll, the war scroll, the community rule. Oh, I think I just read that. Oh, okay. The commentary on Habakkuk scroll, the great Isaiah scroll, and fragments of the book of Enoch from Qumran Cave 7. All right. Now, there's also, which is interesting, since the publication of my last book, I have shown and recently released a calendar which ties together the ancient Hebrew lunar, the Enochian ancient Hebrew lunar calendar, with that of the Gregorian solar calendar. And um, so to help people to know when Kadesh occurs so that you can stay in alignment with Sabbath. I've explained all that here um, in great detail. But anyways, it's interesting that there's a whole set of Qumran calendrical texts which describe, and I'll read a little bit about that, because it seems that the Essenes were also um, followers of the calendar, which I wrote about in great detail in my last book, The Flat Earth as Key to Decrypt the Book of Enoch. And I talked about the 354-day lunar calendar, how it connects to the 364-day Enochian solar calendar, and how these two calendars come together. So I'm going to just read a little bit about this. It's interesting. There are about 20 different texts from Qumran which deal with the 364-day solar calendar. They are mainly very fragmentary, so the calendar is not completely understood. However, it is significantly different from the Babylonian lunar calendar, which evolved into the 354-day Hebrew calendar. I personally don't believe that. It's my opinion that the Most High gave the Hebrew lunar calendar to even Adam. And I show this in my latest book as well. And Adam passed that on to Enoch because Adam was given 5 books when he was cast out, exiled from paradise and banished here to the earth. And one of those books was about the calendar system and also about um, basically the celestial, the heavenly luminaries as being a giant clockwork and timepiece, the sun and the solar day, um, and then you have the moon, the quarterly phases equaling to a week, its monthly phases equaling to a month, and then the movements of the both the sun and the moon through the 6 gates of heaven, equaling both the lunar month and the solar month, and how they together added up to the 364 days solar year and the 354-day lunar year. And all of that I show in my latest book because I learned all that when I decrypted the book of Enoch, the book on the courses of heavenly luminaries, which are contained in great detail in that book. All right, continuing. The scrolls calendar divided the year into 4 quarters and recorded the feast days of the community. Feasts were fixed to the solar year and so occurred on different days from those indicated in the Babylonian based calendar. Many of the texts are rosters of weekly shifts of courses of temple service for the 24 priestly families known as the Mishmarat. The calendar is foreseen in the early sections of the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees, texts also found in large numbers at Qumran. Just a little bit more about this. The year is made up of 12 months grouped in quarters. Each quarter contains 3 months of 30 days, which is exactly the time that it takes the sun to go through each of the gates of heaven, as I showed. And then you have 4 days for the 2 equinoxes and the 2 solstices, equaling a 364 day year and a 91 day quarter. All right, containing 3 months of 30 days and one of 31 days, 91 days or 13 weeks each quarter. The following table shows a quarter of the year. The names are provided only to facilitate of understanding. Other than the weekly Sabbath, the other days were merely numbered in the calendrical text. The Hebrews, for those that don't know, they don't follow the pagan names of the days of the week. The days are not named Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, which are all pagan names. Monday is for Moon Day, Tuesday, these are Norse gods, Tuya Day. Wednesday was Odin or Woden's Day. Thursday, Thor's Day. Friday, Freya's Day. Saturday was Saturn's Day, and Sunday is for the sun. Those are all pagans. They just basically named their days of the week 1 through 6, and then the 7th day was the Sabbath. All right. However, the calendar as we know it is 364 days long, making it 1.25 days short of a true year. Now, I'm not actually certain that the year is 365.25 days. Um, there's that can be actually contested, but we'll just say that it is. Um, I actually believe that the year is 364 days, according to, and has been preserved in that manner according to the book of Enoch, and that the Most High wouldn't allow, because he says in Jubilees chapter 6 to not lose track of the 364-day year, meaning that, in my opinion, there's no way that he would create some kind of phenomena or something that to occur that would add or necessitate adding 1 day, 1.25 days. Just doesn't make sense. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, read the second half of Jubilees, chapter 6. All right, I'm going to go ahead and skip down because we're running out of time. And I only got one more portion to cover the Nag Hammadi Codices. And let me give Kathy this so she can share this with you as well. This will be what I will be reading from, and there's a lot of information on the codices. So let me just read a little bit about them, and then I'll start naming off these texts. The Nag Hammadi Library is a collection of Gnostic texts discovered near the Upper Egyptian town of Nag Hammadi in 1945. 12 leather-bound papyrus codices buried in a sealed jar were found by a local farmer named Muhammad al-Saman. The writings in these codices comprise 52 mostly Gnostic treatises, but they also include 3 works belonging to the Corpus Hermeticum and a partial translation alteration of Plato's Republic. In his introduction to the Nag Hammadi Library in English, James Robinson suggests that these codices may have belonged to a nearby Pachamian monastery and were buried after Saint Athanasius condemned the use of non-canonical books in his festal letter of 367 AD. The discovery of these texts significantly influenced modern scholarship into early Christianity and Gnosticism. The contents of the codices were written in the Coptic language. The best known of these works is probably the Gospel of Thomas, of which the Nag Hammadi Codices contain the only complete text. After the discovery, scholars recognized that fragments of these sayings attributed to Jesus appeared in manuscripts discovered at Oxyrhynchus in 1898, and matching quotations were recognized in other early Christian sources. Subsequently, a 1st and 2nd century Gospel of Thomas. First and 2nd century date of composition, circa 80 AD or earlier, had been proposed for the lost Greek originals of the Gospel of Thomas. The buried manuscripts date from the 3rd and 4th centuries. The Nag Hammadi Codices are currently housed in the Coptic Museum in Cairo, Egypt. The site of discovery. The story of the discovery of the Nag Hammadi Library in 1945 has been described as exciting as the contents of the find itself. In December of that year, 2 Egyptian brothers found several papyri in a large earthenware vessel while digging for fertilizer around the Jabal Ma Tarif caves near present-day Hamra Dam in Upper Egypt. Neither originally reported the find as they sought to make money from the manuscripts by selling them individually at intervals. The brothers' mother burned several of the manuscripts, worried apparently that the papers might have dangerous effects. As a result, what came to be known as the Nag Hammadi Library, owing to the proximity of the find to Nag Hammadi, the nearest major settlement, appeared only gradually, and its significance went unacknowledged until after its initial discovery. In 1946, the brothers became involved in a feud and left the manuscripts with the Coptic priest. His brother-in-law in October that year sold a codex to the Coptic Museum. All right, we'll be right back for final segment. All right, welcome back, everybody, for final segment. I'm going to open up this portion by answering a question that Blues Girl had asked in the chat room. She asked me, any books in the canon cause you pause? And there is actually, and it's one of my most favorites, and it's something that I can set up the foundation for this particular segment with. And that particular book is Matthew chapter 13, because it's in that particular chapter and that particular part of the text that Yeshua himself alludes to why he speaks to in parables. And he says that he speaks in parables for because those seeing see not, those hearing hear not, and neither do they understand. And so he says that he has to use parables in order to bring certain points, and that the elect will understand and will be able to make sense of what he's talking about. And then he goes into the account of the seeds and how some of them found foundation and took up root and became good crops, and then others that did not. And then he talked about the differentiation between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent, and reflected on the garden parable, what I've written about in great detail as being the episode which most recognize as Eve being beguiled by the serpent, and that her being beguiled by the serpent is, or her eating fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that that beguilement actually has sexual connotations and is the reason why she was impregnated with the child Cain, who was the firstborn son of the devil, and a hybrid scion of the serpent. And why it is that the curses in Genesis 3 are related to fruit progeny, and why it says there will be enmity placed between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent, meaning the children of the devil and the children of Adam. And then he elaborates on in the parable of the sower that an enemy snuck into the garden and had sown the tares. And that the reason that Lucifer was not punished and cursed like the watchers were in Genesis 6 when they slept and mated with the daughters of Cain was because the tares and the wheat would be allowed to grow up together, meaning that the devil's children would be allowed to propagate and to multiply, and that the war between these two bloodlines and seed lines would be ongoing until the time of the end. And Yeshua explained that when he returned, he would send the angels out as reapers, and that then they would separate the wheat and the tares, and they would gather the wheat for the barn for preservation and the wheat for burning. And then afterwards, and here's where I'm going with this particular commentary, afterwards, after speaking all these parables and laying out all these teachings in parable form, then he sends the multitudes away. His apostles come up to him and ask him plainly to explain to them the parable, the wheat and the tares. They know it not, meaning they did not understand. And then he explained to them that the enemy is the wicked one. And the wicked one is he that had sown the enemy. The wicked one was same as it says in John chapter 3. Cain, who was of that wicked one, it was the wicked one that had sown the tares. And then in explaining the parable of the wheat and the tares, he says, the devil is the father of the tares. And then he explained that the harvest is connected to the end of days, and that he would send the angels as reapers, and they would gather. They would basically, when he takes his judgment seat. Um, and so, anyways, I don't want to spend any more time on that. Any canon scriptures that you question? Um, yeah, I question a lot of them, and especially if there's contradictions, which in the canon itself there are contradictions between teachings. I'm not going to go in great detail into all that because I don't really have the time, and that would take the entire show. And so I'm going to just finish up with the Nag Hammadi Codices, and because I've got a couple other things I want to talk about as well. But let me go ahead and give you the list of. I'm not even going to finish the story because I'm running out of time. So, in the codices, I'm going to take you through the 12 codices. The codices are different codexes, and they each one of them contain different books. In Codex 1, you have the prayer of the Apostle Paul, the Apocryphon, the secret book of James. Oh, this is also what I wanted to explain before I go into this. Um, what I was what I was talking about in connecting that to Matthew chapter 13 is because the Nag Hammadi Codices, when you look into, investigate, research them for yourselves, what you learn is that these teachings, many of these books were given to the apostles after the resurrection of Christ. And whereas he had spoken in parable form all the way up until his death, the crucifixion, and resurrection, when he came back and he taught the apostles for the 40 days he was with them, he did not speak to them in parable anymore. He explained to them directly what all of the teachings meant. And these books are called the secret books, the secret teachings of Yeshua. And that's where these Nag Hammadi Codices, they're so profound that most people don't understand them. And because the mainstream Christians and pastors and preachers can't make sense of them, they just automatically label them as Gnostic, like that's some kind of bad thing. and and because they can't understand the deeper and more profound teachings, that because, as I said, these are these secret books. These are the books where Jesus and Yeshua just lays it out exactly as it is, without parable. This is the meat, and most people are not prepared for the meat. So even if they read it, these books won't make sense to them. They can't handle the truth. And that has nothing to do with there being a problem with the text. It has to do with there being a problem with the people that just can't handle the meat. They need to be given milk. And so these are advanced teachings, in my opinion. All right, continuing because I know I'm running out of time. All right, so the second book of the first codex is the Apocrypha, the secret book of James. The third book, the Gospel of Truth. The fourth, the treatise on the resurrection. The fifth book, the tripartite tractate. In the second codex, you have the Apocryphon, which Apocryphon just means secret book. The Apocryphon of John, the secret book of John. In also the Gospel of Thomas, which again, the only full length version was found with the Nag Hammadi Codices, which that, in my opinion, is a reflection on that they are important, and that the Most High wanted them to be studied and reflected upon. The third book, the Gospel of Philip. The fourth book from the second codex, the hypostasis of the archons, or what is also referenced as the reality of the rulers, which basically these books teach you who the Nakash are, who the reptilian rulers that are hiding from behind the scenes, what the emerald tablets speak of as the serpent headed beings that took over the council of the might, the council, the rulers of earth, um, the royal families. And many of these books actually talk about the archons and who these interdimensional beings that are ruling from behind the scenes truly are. Again, as I said, this is meat. This is the advanced hardcore teachings which most people are not ready for. Um, okay, continuing. The fifth book of the second codex, on the origin of the world, which is one of my most favorite books as well. The sixth book, the exegesis on the soul. The seventh book, the book of Thomas the Contender. The third codex, the Apocryphon of John, the short version, the secret book of John. The second text, the Gospel of the Egyptians, which is one of these Gospels that was lost and, was rediscovered with the Nag Hammadi Codices. The third, Eunostus the Blessed. The fourth book, the Sophia of Jesus Christ. The fifth book, the Dialogue of the Savior. From the fourth codex, the Apocryphon, the secret book of John, another long version. From the second, the Gospel of the Egyptians, again. The fifth codex, Eunostus the Blessed. The Apocalypse, Revelation of Paul. The third book, the first Apocalypse, Revelation of James. The fourth book, the second Apocalypse or Revelation of James. The fifth book, the Apocalypse or Revelation of Adam. In the sixth codices, the Acts of Peter and the 12 Apostles. The second book, the Thunder, the Perfect Mind. The third, the Authoritative Teaching. The fourth book, the Concept of Our Great Power. The fifth book, Plato, the Republic. The sixth book, the Discourse on the Eighth and the Ninth. The seventh book, the Prayer of Thanksgiving. The eighth book, Asclepius. In the seventh codex, the Paraphrase of Shem. The second treatise of the Great Seth. The Apocalypse, Revelation of Peter. The Teachings of Sylvanus. The three Stellas of Seth. Those are the 5 books of the seventh codex. In the eighth codex, you have Zostrianos and the letter of Peter to Philip. Those are the 2 books of the eighth codex. In the ninth codex, Melchizedek, the thought of Norea, and the testimony of truth. Those are the 3 books of the ninth codex. In the 10th codex, Marcion. In the in the 10th codex, Marcions. That's the only book of that codex. And then the 11th codex, you have the interpretation of knowledge, a Valentinian exposition, the Allogenes, the foreigner, and Hypsiphron. Those are the 4 books of the 11th codex. The 12th codex, the sentence of Sextus, the gospel of truth, and other fragments. And then the 13th codex, 3 trimorphic protonoia, the 3 forms of first thought, and on the origin of the world. So those are the 13 codices. And there were others that were burned, that were used as fuel for fire, which, I wish we had those. Really quick, I'm going to make mention of some other texts as well that are listed in the back of the lost books of the Bible, which are also other texts that we no longer have. And some of these books, the Acts of Andrew, the Gospel of Andrew, the Gospel according to the 12 Apostles, the Gospel of Barnabas, the writings of Bartholomew, the Gospel of Bartholomew, the Gospel of Basilides, Basilides, the Gospel of Cernithius, the Revelation of Cernithus, an Epistle of Christ, an Epistle of Christ number 2, um, the Gospel according to the Egyptians, the Acts of the Apostles, the Gospel of Ebionites, Ebionites, the Gospel of the Encrates, the Gospel of EU, the Gospel according to the Hebrews, the book of Helicasates, the false Gospels of Hesychus, the book of James, um, the Acts of John, the books, the Acts of the Apostles, the Gospel of Judas Iscariot, the Gospel of Jude, the Gospel of John, the Acts of the Apostles of Lentitus, the books of Lentitus, the Acts under the Apostles of Leontitus, um, the Acts of the Apostles by Lithion, um, the Acts of the Apostles written by Manichaees, the Gospel of Marcion, the Gospel of Matthias, uh, the Gospel of the book, well, we have that in Matthew, the traditions of Matthias, the Gospel of Marinthus, the Acts of Paul, the Gospel of the Nazarenes, the preaching of Paul, the revelation of Paul, the Gospel of perfection, the Acts of Peter, the doctrine of Peter, the Gospel of Peter, the judgments of Peter, the preachings of Peter, the revelations of Peter, the Acts of Philip, the Gospel of Philip, the Gospel of the Scythians, the Gospel of Titan, the Gospel of Thaddeus, the Catholic Epistle of the Mason, the Acts of Thomas, the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Truth, and the Gospel of Valentinius. All right, I'm going to finish up with one last thing here. Uh, as you can see, there are many, many different texts. I'm going to mention some contents from the lost books of the Bible and also the forgotten books of Eden, the Protevangelion of James, the Gospel of the infancy of Jesus Christ, the infancy Gospel of Thomas, the epistles of Jesus Christ and Abargas, king of Edessa, the Gospel of Nicodemus, the Apostles' Creed, the Epistle of Paul the Apostle to the Laodicean, the Epistle of Paul the Apostle to Seneca, the Acts of Paul and Thecla, the Epistles of Clement, the first and second epistles of Clement to the Corinthians, the Epistle of Barnabas, the Epistle of Ignatius to the Ephesians, the Epistle of Ignatius to the Magnesians, to the Trellians, to the Romans, to the Philadelphians, to the Smyrnians, to Polycarp, the shepherd of Hermas, the letter of Herod to Pilate the governor, the letter of Pilate to Herod, the lost gospel of Peter, the epistle of Polycarp to the Philippians, and from the forgotten books of Eden, the conflict of Adam and Eve with Satan, the first and second book of Adam and Eve, the secrets of Enoch, that's the second book of Enoch, the Psalms of Solomon, the Odes of Solomon, the letters of Aristes, the fourth book of Maccabees, the story of Ahikar, the testaments of the 12 patriarchs, 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 the 12 I'm going to read some from the Gospel of the Gnostic Bible, the Book of Baruch, the Secret Book of John, the Revelation of Adam, Three Forms of First Thought, the Vision of the Foreigner, the Sermon of Zostrianos, Thunder, the Letter of Peter to Philip, the Gospel of Truth, the Gospel of Philip, the Letter to Flora, the Treatise on the Resurrection, the Prayer of the Messenger Paul, the Secret Book of James, the Round Dance of the Cross, the Songs of Solomon, the Song of the Pearl, the Book of Thomas, the Exegesis on the Soul, on the Origin of the World, the Paraphrase of Shem, the Second Treatise of the Greater Seth, the Gospel of Mary, the Nicene Sermon, Pomiandres, the Discourse on the 8th and the 9th, the Prayer of Thanksgiving, the Ginza, Hibel's Lament of the Book of John, songs from the Mandean liturgy, on the origin of his body, the story of the death of Mani, Kephaya, the Coptic Manichaean songbook, the great songs of Mani, Parthian songs, the mother of books, the gospel of the secret supper, the book of the two principles, a nun's sermon. See, I mean, there are so many books out there, and there are still many that are coming to light. Just like what I had told you with the Thracian Chronicles. I just learned today or yesterday actually that in also, and Alexander is going to give me a list of all the books that are part of the Thracian Chronicles, and I'll share them with you. But I just learned that there's a book called the Acts of Andrews, which is one of those lost texts, and another called the Acts of Maximilia, which is a female, like a female apostle. And then there's another one called the Chronicles of the Apostle Luke. And these are all, as I said, these are all books that are not found in English that are part of the Thracian Chronicles, which we are working on to bring forth to share with you. And I consider it a great honor to be part of the team that is doing that work. And you can see by my love of all of these extra biblical and extra canonical texts why I prize